Good evening, and welcome back to another quiet journey through history. Tonight, we'll drift back to a time before glowing lamps, before the hum of cities, before midnight was just another hour on a clock. This is a story of silence and candlelight, of how people once moved gently into the night. Settle in, let your breathing slow, and let's wander together into the quiet hours before midnight, where sleep came not in one stretch, but in two peaceful acts. How are you tonight? I hope you're comfortable, wherever you are listening from. Maybe you're in London, or Jakarta, or somewhere far across the ocean. What time is it there? Are you just about to sleep, or already halfway to dreaming? If this calm journey helps you rest, feel free to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you can return again for the next quiet story from the past. Now, let's begin our story. Imagine a village hundreds of years ago in the Middle Ages. The sun has just set, and shadows stretch across the narrow streets. There are no electric lights, only a few lanterns flickering in windows, and the faint orange glow of the hearth. The air is cool, carrying the smell of wood smoke. Families begin to withdraw indoors, their day's work done, the world growing softer by the minute. Inside small cottages, people settle down for the evening. The rush of the day has ended. Tools are put away, prayers are whispered, and simple meals are finished. The warmth from the fire drifts across the room, lighting faces in a dim golden tone. In these moments, time itself seems slower, as though the night has stretched open, allowing space for peace. In the quiet corners of homes, the rhythm of rest begins to take shape. There's no hurry to sleep, yet just stillness. The sounds are gentle, the crackle of burning wood, a dog shifting near the door, maybe a faint hum of wind outside. People spoke softly, their voices blending with the calm. It was in this silence that the first wave of tiredness would begin to arrive. Candles, made from beeswax or tallow, were precious. They burned carefully, used sparingly, never wasted. Their small flames gave life to the room, dancing gently against walls. The light was enough for simple tasks, perhaps sewing, reading a short passage, or preparing for bed. When the last one was extinguished, darkness returned fully, a deep kind of dark that few of us ever truly see today. For those living then, night was a season of its own, a realm ruled not by fear, but by rhythm. The people of the Middle Ages didn't divide their nights the way we do now. Sleep came naturally in two parts, with a wakeful period in between. But before we reach that, there was this moment, this calm descent into the first dream, the first sleep. The village outside was wrapped in stillness. The streets, often muddy by day, now held the pale shimmer of moonlight. From one cottage to another, smoke rose faintly through the cold air. Somewhere, a rooster called too early. Elsewhere, a child whispered a final word before sleep. The world seemed small, but whole, complete in its quietness. People at the time didn't fear the night the way later generations did. It was simply another part of life. The absence of light invited reflection, not anxiety. And though dangers existed beyond the walls, wild animals, the unknown, most trusted the safety of their homes. They closed wooden shutters, drew woolen blankets tight, and let the rhythm of darkness carry them toward rest. If you listen closely, you might almost hear it. The fading sound of footsteps, the soft creak of a bed, the sigh of someone settling into warmth. This was the first moment of letting go, the start of sleep before midnight. No urgency, no clocks ticking on the wall. Just the natural pulse of night, moving slowly and steadily as the world drifted into silence. As the hours deepened, A cool hush settled over every home. The fire in the hearth sank to glowing embers, faintly lighting wooden beams and stone walls. Shadows grew soft and long. Outside, the moon climbed higher, brushing rooftops and tree branches with silver light. It was a kind of stillness that wrapped around everything, a perfect quiet that asked nothing but rest. The people of that age had no alarms, no late-night noise, no glowing screens. Sleep came naturally, guided by the rise and fall of the sun. As their eyes closed, the body followed its oldest rhythm, drifting gently toward the first sleep. It was deep and dreamless, a surrender to night itself. Even the sounds of breathing became part of the peace. In this first sleep, the mind and heart rested fully. After hours of labor, after prayers and reflection, the body found its calm. It was a kind of restoration, one that didn't rush. The soft wool blankets, the scent of smoke and straw, and the faint beat of rain on the roof all blended into a lullaby written by nature. Meanwhile, the world outside stayed perfectly still. Only the occasional rustle of wind or the distant call of an animal stirred the silence. In the towns, watchmen walked their routes with lanterns held high, their footsteps echoing softly against stone. In the countryside, only the stars bore witness to the resting world. This first stretch of sleep lasted for several hours, ending around midnight. Then, slowly, people began to wake, not fully, but enough to open their eyes, to breathe deeply, to rise for a short while. To them, this waking was not strange. It was part of the night's pattern, a moment of gentle awareness between dreams. In that quiet waking, some tended the fire, adding a new log to keep the warmth alive. Others whispered small prayers or sat in silence, thinking, listening, being. The night was not something to conquer, but to share. Its stillness offered time to reflect, to stretch, or to simply feel alive before resting again. Scholars would later call this time the watch, but to those who lived it, it had no name. It was simply what people did. They moved softly, careful not to wake the children. They might take a drink of water, check on the animals outside, or whisper a few words to a loved one before lying down once more. As the embers glowed faintly and the cool air pressed close, drowsiness returned like a gentle tide. The eyes grew heavy again, and the second half of the night called them back to their beds. Outside, the moon began its slow descent, preparing to give way to dawn. The rhythm of this two-part rest shaped how people understood sleep, not as a single block of hours, but as a living pattern of night and renewal. It was quiet, natural, and unhurried, something the modern world has largely forgotten. Yet, in these old rhythms, there was harmony between body, time, and the turning earth. And so, as the last candlelight flickered out, the village returned to silence. The people slept again deeply and peacefully until the first color of dawn crept over the fields. The quiet hours before midnight had passed, leaving behind nothing but rest, warmth, and the promise of another day. The first sleep began not with suddenness, but with a slow surrender. As darkness thickened, the rhythm of the day gently faded. The final sounds of the village drifted into silence, the creak of a door closing, the soft bleat of a sheep, the whisper of a prayer spoken near the hearth. One by one, the small candles were snuffed out, and the only light that remained came from the stars above. Inside the cottages, the air was cool and still. The scent of wood smoke lingered, mingling with the faint aroma of herbs or dried flowers hanging from beams. Beds were simple, often straw-stuffed sacks, topped with rough woolen blankets. Yet within that simplicity was comfort. The quiet and darkness wrapped around each sleeper like a familiar embrace. People didn't count hours or chase sleep. It arrived naturally, carried by the steady rhythm of the body. Exhaustion from long days of labor working fields, tending animals, weaving, or mending gave way to deep rest. In those first hours, the mind slipped easily into the calm of dreams, untroubled by light or noise. The first sleep was the body's true restoration. Heartbeats slowed, breathing deepened, and the weariness of the day dissolved. It was said that even the most restless minds grew still beneath the weight of night's silence. In that peace, the world seemed distant, and time itself softened. Outside, the night stretched endlessly. The moon drifted across the sky, casting faint silver over rooftops and fields. If one stepped outside during these hours, they might find the whole village asleep, dogs curled near thresholds, windows dark, and the faint murmur of wind slipping through narrow lanes. Dreams in this first sleep often reflected the simplicity of daily life harvests, family, or the rhythm of prayer. The dreams were not strange or prophetic, but calm and ordinary. They mirrored a life lived close to the land, where the boundary between waking and sleeping felt thin and peaceful. Even in the great houses of nobles, the pattern was the same. Courtiers and servants alike ended their evenings early. Large halls fell silent, except for the hiss of the last torch being extinguished. The same darkness, the same stillness, the same stillness, the same surrender to rest, whether in a stone manor or a humble wooden cottage. In monasteries, the pattern carried its own rhythm. The monks, bound by discipline and faith, began their nights in silence. Their first sleep was short but sacred. Later, when bells called them for prayer, they would rise to chant softly in the candlelight before returning to rest again. The cycle mirrored the harmony of the human body: activity, pause, renewal. The first sleep was the closest people came to complete stillness. In it, there was no sense of rush or separation, only the quiet pulse of being alive within the turning of the earth. It was a shared experience, binding all of society through the simple act of surrendering to the night. By the time the moon reached its highest point, the first sleep would begin to wane. Somewhere in the darkness, a few eyes opened, a breath was drawn. The fire's glow dimmed, calling softly for another log. The world was not yet ready for morning, but neither was it fully asleep. The second rhythm of the night was about to begin. In the stillness after midnight, the first sleep began to loosen its hold. The air inside the cottage was cool now, the embers low but still breathing faint warmth into the room. Somewhere, a log cracked softly. A sleeper stirred, eyes half open, uncertain whether it was dream or waking. This was not a disruption, but a natural part of the rhythm of rest. For centuries, the people of the Middle Ages accepted this gentle waking as a gift of the night, a quiet interval to stretch, to think, to whisper a prayer, or simply to listen to the silence. There was no hurry, no sense of being awake at the wrong time. The world felt wide and still, as though night itself paused to breathe before beginning again. For many, the moment between sleeps was peaceful and familiar. The body, refreshed by the first rest, moved softly without fear of sleeplessness. The faint flicker of a rekindled fire painted golden patterns across the walls, shadows dancing in slow motion. A parent might rise to check on a child, covering them again with a blanket. Someone might sip from a wooden cup of water left nearby, or sit quietly by the window, watching the moon drift behind the trees. Outside, the air was cold enough that breath turned visible, yet even that felt common, other sign that the night still belonged to them. This was not wasted time, it was reflection. In those hours, people often turned inward, thinking of family, harvest, faith, and the cycles that carried their lives forward. Monks used this time for devotion, rising for gentle prayers, believing that the silence of night drew them closer to their Creator. Farmers might sit and plan the coming day's work. Some couples whispered together, speaking softly of hopes and worries too small to share in daylight. This was the heartbeat between sleeps, the small human pause that bridged exhaustion and renewal, a time for both body and soul to find balance. As the minutes passed, the weight of drowsiness returned slowly, like a tide coming back to shore. The muscles softened, thoughts drifted, and the fire began to sink again into its steady glow. The first sleep had cleansed the weariness of the body, and now the second would refresh the mind. In this gradual return to rest, there was no pressure, no expectation. The night allowed time for gentleness. The rhythm was as old as humanity itself: sleep, wake, reflect, and sleep once more. Every part had meaning, and every pause had its peace. By the time the moon began to sink toward the horizon, the people were deep again in their second rest. The sounds of the night, the faint rustle of straw, the sigh of wind outside folded into dreams. The rhythm of the two sleeps completed its circle. Soon, the first light of dawn would color the horizon, calling them gently back to waking life. But for now, they remained in the quiet world between darkness and day, a world held still by peace, by simplicity, and by the soft mercy of rest. Between the first and second sleep lay an hour the people of the Middle Ages called the watch. It wasn't a time of labor or noise, but of calm awareness's soft bridge between dreaming and waking life. Imagine rising from your straw bed as the embers glow faintly red, the room dim yet alive with warmth. The night feels endless, stretching quietly beyond the walls. There's no rush to return to sleep, and no light from clocks to count the passing minutes. The only measure of time is the rhythm of breath, the slow crackle of the fire, and the stillness that holds everything in place. This gentle waking was common and natural. People didn't fear it or call it sleeplessness. It was simply the way the night unfolded. They accepted the pattern of waking in darkness as easily as we now accept turning on a lamp. Some rose to stir the hearth back to life, coaxing flame from ash. Others sat by their bedsides, letting the cool air brush against their faces. Outside, the village slept on, quiet except for the soft howl of wind through the thatch. The world was not asleep, nor awake. It existed in a kind of sacred pause. In this hour, many turned to prayer. Without distractions, hearts and minds found stillness. The silence of night was seen not as emptiness, but as a space filled with reflection and gratitude. In monasteries, bells chimed faintly to call the monks to their midnight prayers, and candlelight flickered through arched windows. But even outside cloistered walls, ordinary people joined this rhythm in their own quiet ways. They whispered verses they remembered, or simply sat in thought, giving thanks to the one who created night as a mercy and rest. Not everyone spent the watch in solitude. Families sometimes used the time for soft conversation. A husband and wife might talk gently, sharing stories of the day, or the hopes they had for their children. Older generations spoke about seasons gone by, about years of planting and harvest, about moments that now lived only in memory. The darkness made honesty easier. In those quiet hours, words carried warmth. They didn't need to fill the silence, they became part of it. For some, the watch was practical. Farmers might check the animals, or see that the fire would last till morning. Women sometimes used the time to prepare dough or mend clothing, tasks that required calm hands and patience. But these were not chores of urgency, they were gentle acts, done with a slow rhythm, guided by the comfort of routine. The faint glow of a candle on worn wooden tables painted everything in gold and shadow, turning ordinary labor into something almost meditative. The watch was also a time for imagination. Without sound or distraction, thoughts wandered freely. Some pondered dreams from the first sleep, trying to recall their meanings. Others gazed out the small windows, tracing constellations or watching the moon slide behind clouds. For them, night was not frightening, it was familiar, a friend that wrapped the world in quiet protection. The darkness itself seemed alive, soft and endless, holding every home in its gentle hands. There are accounts in old writings, letters, diaries, and even medical notes, describing this middle-of-the-night wakefulness as a natural gift. Doctors advised using the time for calm reflection or prayer, saying it eased the mind and steadied the spirit. No one rushed to change it. The rhythm of 2 sleeps was as accepted as the cycle of seasons. People believed the Creator had ordered the world this way, giving night its stillness and the heart its time for rest. The calm between sleeps had a beauty we can barely imagine today. There were no sudden lights to break it, no machines humming, no glowing windows across the street, only silence and breathing, firelight and moonlight. If someone stood outside, then they would hear nothing but the deep song of nature, the whisper of trees, the ripple of water, the distant call of a night bird. In that quiet, the whole world seemed to breathe as one. Inside, the warmth of family filled the dim rooms. A parent might rock a small child who had stirred awake, humming softly until the tiny body fell back into stillness. Beside them, someone might kneel for a short prayer, thanking the Almighty for another safe night. The fireside, in rhythm, the straw mattress creaked, and peace returned like a soft tide. It was not yet time for sleep, but it was already a moment of rest. As the night wore on, thoughts grew slower. The body began to feel the pull of sleep once more. The mind, soothed by quiet reflection, grew heavy and still. Outside, frost clung to the window edges, and the stars shifted above the darkened fields. The watchful wake was nearing its end. Soon the second sleep would call them back to dreams, gentle, unhurried, and blessed with the peace that only silence could bring. By this time of night, the fire's glow had softened to deep red. The air was cool enough that breath fogged faintly in the room, yet no one minded. It was part of the familiar stillness. Outside, the stars continued their slow drift across the black sky. In that half-lit world, everything seemed suspended between movement and rest. The watch, though quiet, was not empty. It was full of small moments that reminded people of the rhythm of their lives and of the comfort found in simple routines. Even those who couldn't read or write found peace in the steady silence, a language of calm that needed no words. Some travelers, sleeping in inns or barns along the road, also followed this pattern. They might wake halfway through the night and listen to the wind pushing softly at the shutters. For them, the watch was less about comfort and more about awareness, being reminded of where they were. Far from home, yet safe under the same moon as everyone else. The gentle pause between sleeps was a shared human experience, binding together peasants, monks, nobles, and wanderers alike. No matter where they were, night unfolded in the same slow rhythm. In certain towns, the faint sound of a church bell would mark the passing hours. The distant toll was not meant to wake, but to keep time for those already awake, the watchmen patrolling the streets, or the monks in their midnight prayers. Its echo rolled softly through empty alleys and courtyards, fading into the dark. Even that sound, gentle and hollow, became part of the lullaby of the night. It reminded the people that the world still turned, quietly, beneath the care of the Almighty. Not every soul spent the watch in wakefulness. Some drifted between dreams and waking thoughts, resting half in one world and half in another. Their minds floated in calm currents where, of the cold on their skin, the faint creak of wood, the breath of another sleeper beside them. For these moments, life itself felt hushed, as though creation paused to listen. There was no need to rise, no need to move, only to exist in peace, surrounded by the deep comfort of night. Those who remained awake longer often described this time as gentle clarity. Without the brightness of day or the chatter of voices, the mind became clear enough to see itself. Some later writers called it the philosopher's hour, when reflection flowed easily and understanding came quietly. Many great ideas, small inventions, and quiet prayers were born in this space between sleeps, a reminder that inspiration often grows in silence, not in noise. In the countryside, shepherds who kept night watch over their flocks experienced a similar peace. Standing beneath the stars, they listened to the rhythm of nature, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of sheep moving softly through grass, the faint whisper of wind across the hills. Alone but not lonely, they too shared in the great stillness that blanketed the land. For them, the night was a living presence, gentle, patient, and humbling in its quiet power. Meanwhile, inside the homes, fatigue slowly returned. Eyelids grew heavy, movements slower. The fire's last glow faded into ash. A parent whispered one last word, a prayer for safety, a blessing for morning. Slowly, everyone returned to their beds, letting warmth and darkness draw them down again. The second sleep was ready to begin, and with it, the promise of renewal before dawn. This rhythm, sleep, wake, reflect, sleep again, was as natural to the people of that age as breathing. It wasn't planned or forced. It was simply the way life aligned with the earth and sky. The two halves of sleep mirrored the balance found in every part of creation, labor and rest, noise and silence, light and shadow. Each had its place, each its time. As the final hour before dawn approached, the world grew completely still once more. The moon began its slow descent, and the frost outside shimmered faintly in the faintest hint of morning. Inside, hearts rested easy. The watchful wake had ended, its peace gently replaced by the deeper calm of the second sleep. The night, having offered its quiet gifts, prepared to give way to the first light of day. By the time the roosters crowed and the village began to stir, no one remembered their waking in the middle of the night. It was part of the natural order, forgotten by morning yet deeply woven into the fabric of rest. The world would rise again to work and prayer, to laughter and routine, but beneath it all remained the memory of that quiet hour, when even the smallest flame seemed eternal and silence itself felt alive. When the people of the Middle Ages awoke between their two sleeps, many turned instinctively toward quiet devotion. The darkness of night, unbroken by noise or distraction, was a companion to prayer. They believed that the silence carried their words further, that the calm hours before dawn were made for reflection. There were no elaborate rituals, no grand ceremonies, only stillness, breath, and gratitude. The flicker of the hearth became their candle, the soft rhythm of sleep their reminder of the mercy of rest. In that deep, private time, they asked for peace, for health, and for strength to meet another day. The night felt alive but gentle, as if creation itself paused to listen to their whispers. Within monasteries, this rhythm became sacred routine. Long before the sun rose, bells rang faintly across the cold air, their echo weaving through courtyards and stone corridors. The monks rose quietly from their beds, pulling on coarse robes, feet touching the cold floor without complaint. Each step toward the chapel was guided by the light of a single candle, its flame trembling with every breath of air. Inside, they stood in ordered silence, the sound of low voices filling the vaulted room. They did not pray loudly. They murmured in rhythm, voices soft as wind through leaves. In this hour, the night belonged to thought, not to sleep. Outside the cloister walls, ordinary families followed their own gentler version of this midnight reflection. There were no bells to summon them, only the natural waking of the body. A husband or wife might rise quietly, careful not to wake the children. They stirred the fire, adding a small log, then sat for a while in the glow. The air was cold but kind, the silence pure. They didn't speak much. Words felt too heavy for the calm. Sometimes they prayed, sometimes they just breathed, listening to the world rest around them. It was a moment of stillness that asked nothing but awareness. In these hours, the idea of reflection was woven into daily life. People thought not of great events or distant lands, but of the simple circle of their world of harvest, family, and weather, of the work waiting with morning. Their prayers were humble and grounded, rooted in gratitude for food, warmth, and safety. They believed blessings were carried through such small moments, where nothing moved except time itself. To them, prayer was not an escape from life, but part of an acknowledgement that all peace, all sustenance, came only by the will of the Almighty. For those who didn't pray aloud, the act of reflection took other forms. Some quietly mended torn fabric or repaired tools, their hands moving gently in the firelight. These simple tasks, done without hurry, were a kind of meditation. The sound of thread pulling through cloth, or a knife scraping smooth a handle, became the night's music. It was work without urgency, carried out not for necessity, but for peace of mind. They believed that care in small things honored the Creator's design, that even humble acts could hold grace if done with gratitude. Elsewhere, in larger towns, the same scene unfolded in different ways. Bakers prepared dough for the morning's bread, shaping loaves by touch and memory. The smell of yeast and smoke drifted softly into the streets, mixing with the chill air. Watchmen passed by with lanterns, nodding quietly to one another, their footsteps echoing off the stones. In every corner, the world moved slowly, unhurried, respectful of the hour. It was as though all creation breathed in rhythm, a deep inhale of stillness before dawn. The wealthy, too, shared in this rhythm, though their surroundings were grander. In the upper floors of manors, servants rekindled torches along long, echoing halls, while their masters stirred awake for a short while. A noblewoman might read a handwritten psalm by lamplight, her eyes tracing each line with care. A knight might kneel briefly by the window, armor set aside, reflecting not on conquest, but on the fragility of time. For a few short hours, all status, all wealth, and all labor blurred into one truth. That night belonged to stillness, and the Creator who made it so. Many old texts describe how people believed their thoughts at night were clearer, more honest. The absence of daylight stripped away distraction. In the half-dark, the mind wandered inward, toward understanding and humility. The hours between sleeps were considered pure, untainted by the rush of day. Some believed that, if they listened carefully enough, they could sense the quiet order of the world, the steady beat of life beneath the silence. To them, the night was not a void. It was full of meaning. The soft murmur of reflection filled the hours until fatigue gently returned. When words were finished and minds felt calm, people settled once more into their beds. The fire dimmed to a glow, and the air grew cool. What remained was pesan, unspoken gratitude that came from knowing the night had done its work. The soul was lighter, the heart steady, the body ready to surrender again to rest. As eyes closed and breathing slowed, the night's quiet lessons remained, that life moved in cycles, that stillness was not idleness, and that reflection, however brief, was nourishment for the soul. The second sleep would come soon, carrying them through the final stretch of night toward dawn. But for now, silence ruled once more, and in it every heart found balance. As the watchful hours stretched on, the line between wakefulness and slumber began to blur. The human body, refreshed yet calm, moved naturally toward stillness again. The faint hum of the fire was softer now, reduced to quiet pops and the occasional sigh of smoke. The air inside the cottage grew cooler, but comforted by the weight of blankets and the scent of wood and wool. This was the moment when reflection faded into rest, when minds that had been awake in gratitude slowly released their thoughts and drifted toward peace. Outside, the stars shone brighter, the sky deep and steady. The world was silent, and every soul seemed cradled within it. Some historians note that this gentle return to sleep reflected a deep trust in the rhythm of the night. People didn't resist it or chase it. They allowed rest to come on its own, as one might welcome a friend. Their hearts were lighter after prayer, their minds settled from quiet labor. Even if dreams returned, they were softer nalcos of gratitude rather than worry. The faint glow of the moon across the walls, the slow breath of a sleeping family, and the low creak of timber beams all became part of the night's symphony, a song of balance and renewal. In villages, dogs stirred faintly, sensing the calm more than any sound. A few horses shifted in their stalls, hooves brushing hay. In the distance, a faint owl's call passed through the darkness, answered only by silence. This was the pulse of the medieval night, small, steady movements within an immense quiet. There was no thought of time, no worry of dawn's arrival. For those who lived without the noise of the modern world, night was not an interruption of life. It was life at its most honest and unguarded. The second half of rest waited like an open gate. As people laid down again, the body seemed to sigh in relief. The fire's last ember dimmed to red, the sound of it fading until only the hush of breathing remained. The mind wandered freely, half in memory, half in dream. In that fragile space, people often described feeling closer to understanding, not through thought, but through stillness itself. They didn't name it wisdom, but they lived by it, letting silence do what words could not. In monasteries, the last prayers of the watch faded softly into the stone. The monks, weary but calm, returned to their small wooden beds. The chill of night still lingered on their hands, yet peace rested heavy in their chests. They believed the Almighty had written this pattern into the very structure of time, a balance between waking reflection and sleep's surrender. Their rest was an act of faith, not idleness, a trust that dawn would arrive just as surely as night had come. Elsewhere, in towns and manors, the pattern repeated without fail. The baker, finished with his dough, finally rested beside the oven's faint heat. The shepherds, on distant hills, wrapped in cloaks, leaned against trees and closed their eyes. In the great houses, candles burned low in golden holders, casting long shadows across polished floors. Every heart, no matter how different in life, moved together through the same rhythm of nighter, quieter quality born in rest. As sleep deepened, dreams softened into something ungraspable. Historians have found few records of what people dreamed during these centuries, but perhaps that is fitting. Dreams, after all, belong to the realm of silence, the part of life that cannot be measured or remembered clearly. In those forgotten dreams, perhaps the people of the Middle Ages found the same peace they sought in their waking prayers: safety, continuity, the comfort of being small beneath a vast and steady sky. Soon, the horizon would pale with the first hints of dawn. Roosters would call, church bells would chime, and the rhythm of day would begin again. But for now, the world lingered in the last breaths of night. Fires were embers, bodies still, and thoughts empty of all but calm. The two sleeps, the prayers, the quiet tasks all completed their circle. What remained was stillness itself, perfect and whole. Through the long hours of darkness, people had lived in harmony with time. Their nights were not battles against wakefulness, but partnerships with it. They accepted that rest could have two movements, two melodies, each serving its purpose. And within that pattern, they found balance we may have forgotten, but one that still whispers to us when we wake too early and wonder why. When the first light touched the windows and the birds began to stir, the night released its final sigh. Every sound, the low crack of wood, the gentle stir of blankets, seemed to belong to a grand and patient design. The people would rise soon, ready for the day's labor, hearts steady from rest. Yet deep inside, a trace of the night's peace would remain, the quiet memory of prayers, reflection, and the unbroken rhythm of sleep, watched over by the silence of the Creator's night. The second sleep began like the turning of a page. The prayers had quieted, the embers glowed faintly, and the stillness of midnight had passed into something softer. For many in the Middle Ages, this second rest was the sweetest part of the night, a gentle return to dreams after the mind had been cleansed by reflection. The first sleep restored the body, but the second restored the soul. It was the deeper calm that came only when one had already tasted the silence of wakefulness. As people settled again under heavy wool blankets, the quiet of the world folded around them like a cloak, and the rhythm of breathing filled each small home. Unlike the first sleep, which began from exhaustion, the second came willingly. The body had stretched, moved, and awakened, only to find comfort again. It was not a surrender, but a choice, a deliberate return to rest. The fire burned lower now, its orange light flickering faintly over rough-hewn beams. Outside, the moon hung low in the western sky, silvering the frost on rooftops. The faint scent of smoke lingered in the cold air. Everything that lived seemed to pause again. Dogs curled tighter, horses stilled, the entire village wrapped once more in the warmth of collective quiet. This second slumber was often described as lighter, more fluid. Dreams came easier, flowing from thought and memory rather than fatigue. People dreamt of their fields and families, of the coming seasons, or of journeys they would never take. The second sleep was less about escape and more about reflection, in another form, a weaving of the day's emotions into patterns that soothed the mind. Historians believe this gentle dreaming gave people a kind of clarity when morning came, a calm that came from truly finishing the cycle of rest. Inside the cottages, the stillness was nearly perfect. Only the occasional sound of a shifting body broke the silence. The cool air brushed through small cracks in the walls, carrying faint traces of the earth and distant trees. For those few hours, the world felt balanced, half asleep, half awake, floating between night and dawn. In these moments, sleep was not an act of escape from the world, but a part of it, aligned perfectly with nature's own rhythm. It's said that children often slept more soundly in the second sleep than at any other time. The world was so quiet, so deep, that nothing disturbed them. Their small breaths mingled with the soft sounds of the room, the fading crackle of wood, the steady rhythm of the wind outside. Parents sometimes woke slightly just to listen, feeling a sense of peace too profound to name. They believed this silence was a blessing, a moment when time itself rested. For them, this peace was not man-made, it was granted, a mercy that came each night without demand. Farmers, who would rise with the first light, treasured these last hours most of all. They knew that when the rooster called, labor would return, tending animals, working fields, carrying water. But for now, they could rest in the knowledge that everything was prepared. The world beyond their walls would wait. Their sleep was not hurried. It was earned, and every breath of it was honest. In this final stage of the night, their dreams mingled with the rhythm of the earth itself. In larger towns, the same hush lay over the narrow streets. The night watchmen, making their last rounds, heard almost nothing, their footsteps echoing softly through empty lanes. Behind every shuttered window, people slept in layers of quiet. Even the city's stray cats curled beneath carts or doors, their eyes heavy. The streets belonged to no one, and even time seemed reluctant to move. In that suspended moment, the world rested together. For those in monasteries, the second sleep was brief but sacred. After midnight prayers, they returned to their cells, letting the mind sink back into stillness. It was not indulgence, but obedience to the body's need for renewal. The monks viewed this rest as a divine designer rhythm, granted so that the heart could recover before morning devotion. Even sleep, they believed, was an act of faith, a sign of humility in surrendering to rest created by the Almighty's wisdom. Scholars who later studied the writings of that time found many references to this second sleep, though few explanations. People didn't question it because it felt natural. Physicians advised it, poets mentioned it, and priests accepted it as part of life's balance. It was not superstition or custom, but simply how the human body had adapted to darkness before the intrusion of constant light. Their understanding of rest, though unscientific by modern standards, was quietly profound. They saw sleep not as a task, but as a conversation between body and time. As the hours deepened toward dawn, the second sleep took hold completely. Dreams became longer and lighter, the edges of consciousness softer. Outside, frost gathered on the earth, glinting beneath the fading stars. The world waited for the sun to return, but inside, hearts and bodies rested in the last sweetness of night. There was no sense of rushing toward morning-only peace, as though all creation exhaled together before waking once more. As dawn slowly approached, the second sleep deepened into its quietest moments. The mind, now emptied of worry, drifted through soft dreams that felt neither long nor short, only endless in calm. The sound of breathing filled the air, and the cool touch of morning pressed gently against the walls. Outside, the stars began to fade, their light replaced by the faintest shimmer of grey along the horizon. Inside, all remained still. Even the animals sensed the transition. Their movements were patient, unhurried. In this fragile time before waking, the second sleep held everything: peace, stillness, renewal. It was the final breath of night before the world began again. This stage of sleep was different from the first. It was lighter, but somehow deeper in spirit. The body was ready to wake, yet unwilling to let go of its calm. Many described waking from the second sleep as rising through layers of water, slow and gentle. The senses returned gradually: the smell of the fire, the chill of the floor, the sound of a distant rooster. No one leaped from bed, no one rushed toward the day. They allowed the morning to come as naturally as the night had fallen. To them, waking was not an interruption of rest, but the final part of it. The first rays of light slipped through the cracks of wooden shutters. Shadows on the walls softened, turning from black to grey, then to the faint gold of early sun. Smoke from dying fires curled lazily toward the ceiling. In cottages and manors alike, people began to stir. A cough, a murmur, the rustle of straw signs that life was slowly returning. For those first few minutes, no words were spoken. The world seemed to rise in silence, carrying forward the peace it had gathered through the night. For centuries, this two-part sleep was simply how people lived. It shaped their habits, their prayers, and their understanding of rest. Waking in the middle of the night was not seen as strange, it was expected, a rhythm set by the turning of the earth and the dimness of natural light. Even after the invention of candles and oil lamps, many continued to live by this pattern. They saw it not as inconvenience, but as grace, a time to think, to pray, or simply to be. Sleep was as alive as day, and night had its own kind of wisdom. But as the centuries turned and cities began to glow, the second sleep began to fade. Street lamps flickered across cobblestone roads, keeping the darkness at bay. Work hours grew longer, and the invention of clocks brought precision where once there had been only rhythm. People began to stay awake later, pushing their rest into a single block. The world grew brighter, but quieter nights were lost. The ancient harmony between darkness and sleep slowly dissolved into the hum of the modern age. Historians have found that by the time of the Industrial Revolution, most people no longer spoke of two sleeps. The phrase, first sleep, disappeared from language and literature alike, forgotten like an old melody no one remembered how to hum. The natural rhythm of waking and resting in cycles had been replaced by the strict discipline of a continuous night's sleep, efficient, but less poetic. Light, once a miracle of fire and wax, had conquered the night entirely, yet the body still remembers. Even today, when we wake briefly in the early hours, unsure why, we echo that ancient pattern. Our ancestors would not have called it insomnia. They would have smiled, stirred the fire, and waited patiently for rest to return. In those moments, we feel something ancient, a quiet reminder that the human rhythm was once slower, softer, and more forgiving than the pace we know now. The second sleep, in all its calm simplicity, teaches something profound, that true rest is not just the absence of work, but the presence of peace. It asks for nothing more than surrender to the night, to stillness, and to the gentle order of creation. For the people of the Middle Ages, sleep was not an interruption of life, but one of its purest forms. As dawn broke over the fields and the first voices rose, the memory of the night's twofold rhythm lingered unseen. It lived in the heartbeats of those who woke slowly, grateful for another day. It lived in the soft sighs of children turning in their blankets, and in the quiet prayers whispered before work began. The two sleeps might have vanished, but their peace remained woven into the soul of humanity, waiting to be remembered. And as the sun finally crested the hills, spilling golden light across rooftops and fields, the people of that distant age began their day. They did not rush. They carried the calm of night with them, the gift of the second sleep still warm in their hearts. For a few fleeting moments, even the noise of the waking world could not erase that peace, the timeless harmony between darkness, rest, and the steady turning of the earth beneath them. In an age untouched by electricity, the night itself shaped the way people lived and slept. The cycle of darkness and dawn ruled everything from planting seasons to prayer hours, and the human body followed willingly. It made perfect sense to rest in two halves. The long hours between sunset and sunrise were too deep and wide to pass in a single stretch of slumber. Instead, people let the night divide itself, sleeping first to ease the body, waking gently to reflect, and then sleeping again to restore the mind. The two sleeps were not invention or superstition, they were the body's honest answer to nature's rhythm. Before clocks, time was felt, not measured. The fading of the light signaled the day's end, and the rising of the moon marked the beginning of rest. Without street lamps or glowing windows, darkness arrived fully, pressing close like a physical presence. People could not push it away, they accepted it. The human mind, freed from artificial light, followed a natural rhythm known today as the circadian cycle. The body cooled, melatonin increased, and sleep came gently in two waves. Each wave carried its own purpose. The first to heal the body, the second to quiet the soul. The structure of medieval nights made this rhythm not only natural but practical. In winter, the nights stretched long 14, sometimes 16 hours of darkness. Few could sleep straight through such length. Dividing rest allowed the hours to pass with comfort and purpose. Between sleeps, people could tend to fires, check on livestock, or simply think. In that wakeful middle, the world was theirs alone, free of work, noise, and demand. The pattern was efficient in a quiet way, half for renewal, half for reflection. It fit the world's slow pulse perfectly. Socially, two sleeps made sense too. Life was built around daylight. Morning began with the rooster's crow, and evening ended when the last task faded from sight. Once the sun set, no one could continue weaving, ploughing, or trading. Sleep came early by necessity, but because dawn came late, there was room between rest and workroom, enough for 2 rounds of slumber, one before and one after midnight. It was not laziness, it was balance. A world without artificial light demanded this natural division. Religion also shaped the habit. In Christian Europe, for example, monasteries kept strict schedules of prayer known as canonical hours, one of which fell near midnight. Monks would wake for devotion, their chants echoing through the darkness before returning to their beds. Outside the monastery, villagers mirrored that rhythm in their own way, waking to pray quietly, to think, or to sit in silence. What began as a spiritual custom became part of the wider human pattern, uniting sacred and ordinary lives beneath the same night sky. Medical thought of the time supported this practice as well. Physicians from the Middle Ages, drawing on Greek and Islamic traditions, believed the body worked in cycles of activity and recovery. The first sleep was said to digest food and restore the flesh, while the second refreshed the spirit and sharpened the mind. Some medical texts even advised gentle waking between sleeps to balance humors and aid circulation. While modern science uses different language, the idea remains strikingly similar. Rest is not one long act, but a rhythm, a dance between waking and dreaming. Seasonal changes also influenced the pattern. In summer, when nights were shorter and work days long, people often slept only once. But in winter, when darkness lingered, the double sleep returned. It was flexible, adjusting to the Earth's rotation and the length of daylight. No strict rules, no alarms, just human life moving in harmony with the planet's breath. The natural world was teacher and clock alike, and the body learned its lessons by instinct. Even the way homes were built reflected this understanding. Hearths were central to every house, both as a source of warmth and light during the night watch. Families gathered near the embers between sleeps, speaking softly or mending what needed repair. The architecture of rest revolved around light, the flicker of flame, the rhythm of burning logs, marking time until the second sleep. The house itself participated in the cycle, glowing and dimming like a living thing. The absence of light pollution made the sky itself a companion. During the wake between sleeps, people often stepped outside to look at the stars. The heavens were clearer then, unclouded by smoke or glare. The sight of constellations offered comfort and a reminder of order of vastness that made life's daily troubles small. People didn't seek meaning in the stars as divine forces. Rather, they found peace in their steadiness. It was a nightly reassurance that creation moved exactly as it was meant to, in every sense, biological, social, and spiritual. The two sleeps fit perfectly into the world that existed before electricity. It was not a superstition or oddity, it was alignment. The body, the land, and the heavens all shared a rhythm, and sleep was simply part of that harmony. To rest twice was to move with the universe rather than against it. And when dawn finally came, it was not a harsh awakening, but a slow and natural return from the deepest peace. Evidence of this two-part sleep appears across old writings, scattered like faint footprints through time. Medieval diaries, legal records, and letters mention people rising after their first sleep to talk, pray, or simply think. In the 15th century, an Englishman wrote of waking after the first sleep to read scripture before lying down again. French texts used the same phrasing premier. Some, while Italians spoke of primos anno. Even physicians like Thomas Cogan and historians like Roger Eckarch, centuries later, would uncover patterns hidden in these simple words. They show that the practice wasn't rare or ritual, it was ordinary life, common across Europe and beyond. In rural villages, this rhythm lingered the longest. Farmers and shepherds who lived far from city lights followed the same pattern well into the 17th and 18th centuries. Their lives were bound to daylight and weather, not the mechanical ticking of clocks. The rooster, the fire, and the stars were their measures of time. For them, first and second sleep weren't just habits, they were companions that marked the slow passing of the night. Between them lay a space for silence, faith, or thought, a space that no invention could replace. Scholars studying old court records have even found clues hidden in testimonies. Witnesses sometimes described crimes or arguments occurring after the first sleep, meaning just past midnight. To modern ears, that sounds poetic, but to them it was precise. It was how people located events in time. The phrase had practical meaning because everyone understood it. Just as we might say early morning, they said after first sleep, and everyone knew what it meant, the middle of the night, before the return to dreams. Not all parts of the world followed the same pattern, but similar rhythms appeared elsewhere too. In rural Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, communities who lived by natural light often shared versions of segmented sleep. Shepherds in Persia and farmers in Andalusia described periods of quiet wakefulness at night for reflection and prayer. Though customs differed, the essence was the same. Sleep was not a single act, but a flowing cycle, tuned to the earth's turning and the night's length. It was a harmony humanity once held in common. The disappearance of the two sleeps began gradually. As the 17th century gave way to the 18th, artificial lighting changed everything. Oil lamps burned brighter and longer, and cities glowed deep into the night. People began to stay awake later, gathering in taverns or reading in parlors illuminated by steady flames. The dark no longer demanded surrender. The old rhythm, where night had once divided itself into two halves, began to collapse into one continuous stretch. The first sleep shrank, the waking period disappeared, and by the dawn of industry, the second sleep was forgotten. With the coming of electricity in the 19th century, light conquered darkness completely. Factories worked through the night, and workers were expected to rest in a single block before dawn. The idea of waking in the middle of the night now seemed strange, even unhealthy. Doctors began to label it insomnia. The natural rhythm of 2 sleeps had been redefined as a problem. What had once been harmony was now something to fix. Humanity had traded its slow partnership with the night for efficiency and control, but the body didn't forget. Modern sleep research, centuries later, began to uncover what the Middle Ages had known instinctively. Studies found that in the absence of artificial light, people often revert to segmented sleep. After a few hours of darkness, they wake gently, stay awake for a short while, and then sleep again. It is the body's oldest rhythm, still alive beneath the layers of modern life. Science gave it a name, Bophosic sleep, but to our ancestors, it was simply night. In that realization lies something quietly profound. The 2 sleeps were not a strange medieval custom. They were the natural expression of being human. Our bodies were designed to rest, wake, and rest again, reflecting the steady balance of creation. When the modern world shortened nights and filled them with noise, it was not evolution, but amnesia. We forgot how to move in time with the world's quieter pace. Some people today still experience this rhythm without knowing its history. They wake in the middle of the night, calm but alert, wondering why. They check the time, feel anxious, and try to force sleep again. Yet, if they could step back in time, they'd see that their ancestors did the same, not with worry, but acceptance. They might have whispered a prayer, sat by the window, or simply watched the fire glow, letting the night cradle them until drowsiness returned. And so, the 2 sleeps made sense, not only to the world of the past, but to something within us still. It was an act of balance, of living gently within the rhythm of creation. To rest twice was to honor both body and spirit, to allow time for thought and time for dream. Perhaps we cannot return fully to that ancient pattern, but remembering it reminds us that rest, like life, was never meant to be rushed. The night was not an obstacle to overcome, but a gift to dwell in, and, through it, humanity once learned the art of peace. When historians first began searching for proof of the 2 sleep pattern, they did not expect to find so much of it quietly resting in plain sight. The evidence wasn't hidden in royal decrees or scholarly books, it lived in the ordinary words of ordinary people. Letters, diaries, and even court records spoke casually of a first sleep and second sleep, as if everyone already knew what those phrases meant. To the people of the Middle Ages, this was not an odd detail worth explaining, it was simply life. It took modern eyes, centuries later, to see that those words described a lost rhythm, a forgotten dialogue between the body and the night. One of the earliest mentions comes from a 13th century prayer manual, which encouraged readers to rise after your first sleep and give thanks before returning to bed. The instruction was brief, but revealing. It assumed that its audience understood the natural waking between 2 periods of rest. Another reference appears in the writings of Sir Thomas More, who noted in passing that he sometimes read or prayed after my first sleep. These weren't poetic turns of phrase, they were glimpses into daily routine. From households to monasteries, the rhythm was shared by all. In household letters from rural England, the pattern appeared again and again. A farmer might write to his son, mentioning that he rose in the middle watch to tend the oxen. A mother described nursing her child after the first sleep before returning to bed. These lines were unremarkable to the writers, but today they stand as historical markers of how human rest once followed the shape of the night. The simplicity of their words gives them authenticity. They were not describing a ritual, they were describing life. Across Europe, language confirmed the habit's universality. In French, people spoke of premier sommeil. In Italian, primo sano. In Latin manuscripts, primo somnia. Even in Spanish, fragments of old lullabies mention el primer sueño. Each phrase means the same: the first sleep, the first phase of rest. The repetition across cultures and centuries shows that segmented sleep was not bound by geography, was a shared feature of the human experience, woven into the very fabric of nightly life. Medieval medical texts discussed it, too. A physician named Conrad Gessner wrote that waking briefly in the middle of the night was the body's natural habit when its humors are balanced. Others advised patients to use the period between sleeps to pray, drink water, or walk slowly to steady the humors. Though their language reflected the limited science of their time, their observations were remarkably accurate. They saw that the body followed a natural rhythm, and they respected it instead of fighting it. Religious writings from the same period reveal the spiritual side of this rhythm. Monks and laypeople alike viewed the hours between sleeps as ideal for devotion. In monasteries, this practice was formalized into matins, the midnight prayers that echoed softly through the cloisters. Outside those walls, farmers and merchants prayed privately at the same time, guided not by bells but by instinct. When the body awoke, they took it as a sign to turn their thoughts heavenward, to thank the Almighty for the peace of the night. Even poets and storytellers hinted at this nightly division. In the Canterbury Tales, Geoffrey Chaucer describes travellers stirring in the night before dawn, half waking, half dreaming before returning to sleep. In the works of Shakespeare, phrases like the second sleep appear naturally, with no explanation given, implying that the audience already understood. Literature of the time did not invent the idea. It reflected what people knew. The night was long, and rest came in to halves. Court documents, some of the most unlikely sources, give us vivid glimpses of this world. In one 16th century case, a woman testified that she heard a knock after the first sleep. In another, a man claimed he left his home between the sleeps to fetch water. These tiny details were used to establish time in legal arguments, much like we might use around midnight today. For historians, they are priceless fragments of a forgotten structure of living proof that segmented sleep was both normal and socially understood. Private diaries from the early modern period, before the Industrial Revolution, show the fading edges of the practice. A London tradesman in 1690 wrote, "Waked past midnight, and sat an hour by the fire. Slept again till 6. His tone is casual, almost indifferent, as though such waking were nothing unusual." Another man recorded, "My wife rose after first sleep to pray for her sister, then lay again." There is tenderness in these lines, a sense that the night still allowed space for both rest and reflection. Perhaps the most revealing discovery came from a single word, sogno, found in Italian household guides from the 1500s. It referred to the pause between sleeps, the sign or signal of waking. It was the quiet hour when the fire was fed, prayers whispered, or thoughts gathered before the body surrendered once more to slumber. That word, long forgotten, captures the very soul of the old rhythm, a recognition that even in sleep there was meaning, and that waking in darkness was not a mistake but part of the night's design. By the 17th century, the world was changing, and with it, the language of the night began to fade. Diaries and letters still mentioned waking after first sleep, but slowly the phrase appeared less often. Candles became cheaper, oil lamps burned longer, and people began to stretch their waking hours deeper into the evening. The gap between sleeps narrowed, then disappeared. Yet, for a time, both worlds existed side by side, the ancient rhythm of the body and the new rhythm of the clock. It was a fragile balance, a slow turning point when humanity started to trade natural darkness for artificial light. One of the last strong traces of the old habit appears in the writings of 17th century clergymen. They continued to encourage midnight prayers, calling them hours of blessing and reminders of humility before dawn. In their sermons, they spoke of waking gently, offering thanks in silence, and then returning to rest. To them, segmented sleep still carried spiritual meaning, a physical rhythm mirroring the balance of faith and patience. But even as they preached this way of life, the outside world was brightening. Light, once rare and precious, was spreading through streets and homes, quietly reshaping the night itself. As artificial light became more common, diaries reflected a subtle shift. People began writing of reading late into the evening or entertaining guests until after midnight. The natural midpoint of the night was no longer a time of silence, but of activity. The words first sleep and second sleep slowly vanished from speech, replaced by the single phrase we know today: a good night's sleep. The change wasn't sudden, it took generations, but by the early 18th century, the language of two sleeps had nearly disappeared. Even so, traces survived in unexpected places. Folk songs in rural France and Ireland mentioned waking in the night, not with fear, but as part of rest's rhythm. In Italy, housekeepers' journals from the 1700s still referred to tending fires after first sleep, and in some parts of Eastern Europe, families kept the tradition alive into the 19th century, using the midnight wake to pray quietly or share a small meal. Though history often remembers kings and battles, it is in these quiet habits that the human story endures the slow evolution of how we lived, rested, and dreamed. Modern historians pieced this story together centuries later. One of the most influential researchers, Roger Eckertz, spent years studying thousands of old texts. He found over 500 references to first sleep, second sleep, and the watch. From Shakespeare to diaries of servants, from letters to legal records, the evidence was overwhelming. What had seemed like a forgotten quirk turned out to be a universal human rhythm. Eckertz's work reminded the world that history is often hidden in plain words, the small, casual phrases that survive when grand events are forgotten. When scientists later tested this theory, they found something remarkable. In experiments where volunteers lived without artificial light, their sleep naturally divided into two halves. After about 4 hours, they would wake peacefully, stay awake for a short while, then drift back into a second rest. The pattern matched perfectly with the medieval descriptions. It was not culture that created it, it was biology. The night, it seemed, had always been meant to unfold in two movements. This realization connected the past and the present in a profound way. The people of the Middle Ages had no science to explain their habits, yet they lived in perfect accord with what the body was designed to do. The modern world, with all its light and noise, had only interrupted something ancient. The discovery wasn't a step backward into nostalgia, but a quiet reminder that wisdom often hides in simplicity. The body remembers what the world forgets. Even today, remnants of this rhythm surface in daily life. Many people wake in the middle of the night and wonder why. They look at clocks glowing beside their beds, feel restless, and fear they cannot sleep. Yet their ancestors would have smiled at such moments, recognizing them as part of the night's natural tide. The middle hour was never a flaw, it was a gift, a small window of peace meant for thought or prayer before returning to dreams. Historians now see the two sleeps not as an odd medieval custom, but as a reflection of balance between activity and rest, between body and mind, between work and faith. The records they found do not simply describe sleep. They reveal a world that lived with patience. In those long hours of darkness, people did not rush to fill time. They accepted it, trusted it, and moved with it. That, perhaps, was the real secret of their rest. As we read their words, centuries later, the farmer's note, the monk's prayer, the mother's letter written by firelight, we glimpse a life attuned to stillness. Every phrase about first sleep and second sleep speaks not just of habit, but of harmony. It reminds us that rest was once an art, shaped by nature's rhythm and the humility to live within it. The evidence, scattered across old pages, does more than prove a fact. It whispers a truth, that peace has always belonged to those who move gently through the night. The disappearance of the two sleeps did not happen overnight. It crept in quietly, like light slipping under a door. For centuries, people had lived in harmony with the dark, letting sleep unfold in two calm halves. But as the world brightened, the old rhythm began to fade. The first to change were the city's places where the night no longer belonged to silence. Street lamps flickered to life, fires burned later, and people stayed awake long after the sun had set. The once gentle division of sleep began to feel unnecessary. The body still remembered, but the world was moving faster, and the night itself was shrinking. The 17th century brought more than invention, it brought ambition. With trade expanding and clocks appearing in town squares, time became something people measured, not something they felt. The night, once a sanctuary, turned into wasted hours that could be used for productivity. In homes and workshops, candles stretched the day further. Oil lamps, once rare, glowed steadily through the dark. For the first time, people could choose to ignore the rhythm of nature. The long middle watch between sleeps began to vanish, replaced by work, reading, and conversation. Humanity had learned how to conquer darkness, but not without losing something quiet and precious. As the century turned, technology accelerated the change. Lanterns lit streets, and wealthy merchants installed glass windows to let more light spill inside. The invention of the printing press made books more common, and reading at night became fashionable. Even those who could not afford many candles still used the faint firelight to stay awake. Across Europe, families gathered longer around tables, sharing stories, singing, or simply passing time. The old world of early rest and midnight reflection gave way to evenings alive with laughter, music, and talk. The two sleeps had less room to breathe. In this new, light-filled age, the meaning of midnight changed entirely. It was no longer the midpoint between rests, it became the heart of activity. Plays in London began at night, cafes in Paris filled with voices, and letters written past 12 carried news and emotion once saved for the morning. For the first time, night belonged to entertainment, not reflection. People went to bed later, and the natural pause between sleeps disappeared. The word midnight itself, once marking a sacred stillness, now meant movement, laughter, and light. Religious traditions, too, began to adapt. The midnight prayers that once aligned perfectly with the natural waking hours grew more difficult to maintain. Monks still kept their canonical hours, but ordinary people began sleeping straight through the night. The human connection to natural darkness, the sense of being part of a greater rhythm, quietly dissolved. The night, instead of being shared with the stars, became a backdrop for labor and leisure. The sky was the same, but the way people lived beneath it had changed forever. By the 18th century, urban centers like Paris, London, and Amsterdam glowed almost as bright as day. Taverns stayed open later, printing shops worked through the night, and ships left harbors at all hours. Gas lamps lined streets, casting yellow light over cobblestones and making midnight walks safe, even inviting. The new power of illumination felt miraculous proof of progress. Yet with every lamp that burned, the world grew further from the natural darkness that once guided its rest. The idea of dividing sleep slowly became outdated, an echo of a world that no longer existed. At the same time, the Industrial Revolution was beginning to reshape society entirely. Factories required precision, and precision required timekeeping. Workers had to rise and rest according to the clock, not the sun. The night was no longer free. It belonged to schedules and shifts. In this rigid new world, there was no space for two sleeps, no patience for stillness between them. The rhythm of labor demanded one block of rest, efficient, measurable, and controllable. Humanity's ancient partnership with the night was replaced by mechanical order. Literature from this era reveals the transformation clearly. Where earlier poets spoke of waking after first sleep, writers of the 1800s began describing the night as a single, unbroken passage. Sleep became something to be completed in one stretch, ideally without interruption. Doctors, once comfortable with the idea of midnight waking, began to call it broken sleep. Insomnia became a diagnosis rather than a natural state. What had been ordinary was now seen as disorder. Progress had redrawn the boundaries of what it meant to rest. Cultural habits followed quickly. The invention of gaslight allowed theaters, salons, and cafes to flourish late into the night. City dwellers gathered for debates, games, and music long after rural villages had gone quiet. Artists painted beneath lamplight, writers worked past midnight, and politicians met in candlelit rooms. The darkness, once feared and respected, became something to tame. It was no longer a season for reflection or prayer, it was a time for creation, ambition, and noise. The second sleep, that gentle descent before dawn, simply had no place in this restless world. Yet, amid all this brilliance, a few voices of caution appeared. Some philosophers and clerics worried that humanity was losing its balance, that the endless stretching of day into night would dull the senses and weaken the spirit. They wrote that constant light left no room for contemplation, that silence was becoming a stranger. But their warnings were faint, drowned out by the roar of progress. The old ways of sleeping, praying, and reflecting were fading into history, leaving only traces in old words and fading memories. As the 19th century unfolded, the old world of two sleeps was nearly gone. Gaslight had spread across cities, and factories hummed even past midnight. The sky, once filled with stars, now glowed faintly orange above the rooftops. Night had changed. Character, it was no longer a realm of silence, but an extension of the working day. In the rhythm of industry, rest became something to be minimized, not savored. Sleep lost its poetry. What had once been a sacred pause between one dream and another turned into a single, hurried necessity squeezed between labor and obligation. Humanity had mastered light, but in doing so had forgotten how to dwell in darkness. The emotional cost of this shift was subtle at first. People began to feel unease when waking in the night, calling it restlessness or worry. The natural break between sleeps, ones filled with prayer, thought, or soft conversation, was now labeled interruption. Instead of peace, it carried guilt. To wake at 2 in the morning was to feel defective, broken against the new standard of unbroken rest. Doctors began to prescribe tonics. Lectures warned against sleeplessness, and society quietly forgot that the body had once lived by another rhythm entirely. Writers and thinkers, however, noticed what had been lost. Charles Dickens, who often walked the streets of London at night, described the eerie calm of gaslit silence, the sense that something ancient lingered beneath the city's glow. In his essays, he called the hours before dawn a strange, watchful peace. Others, like Henry David Thoreau, retreated to nature and rediscovered the stillness of true darkness, writing that night is the bomb of thought. These voices stood as echoes of the medieval night, reminders that the modern world, for all its brilliance, still needed silence to remain human. The transformation of sleep also changed how people dreamed. In the medieval world, dreams had been vivid, layered between two sleeps, shaped by the half-wakefulness of midnight reflection. But as nights shortened and rest grew compressed, dreams became harder to recall, less detailed, less alive. The space for them had vanished. The rush of morning light, the demands of the clock, left little room for lingering in the imagination. The connection between night and creativity weakened. Humanity had traded the poetry of sleep for the precision of time. Social life adapted quickly to this new rhythm. Cafes and theaters thrived in the glow of artificial light, turning night into spectacle. But beneath the laughter and conversation, something quieter was vanishing. The shared stillness that once bound families and neighbors together. No longer did homes fall silent at dusk, or rise again at dawn in unison. The communal rhythm of life fractured into individual routines, each chasing its own clock. Progress had given humanity independence, but at the cost of harmony. By the late 19th century, the language of two sleeps had disappeared entirely from daily speech. The few who still woke naturally in the night no longer called it the watch. They called it insomnia. The idea of rising to think or pray at midnight seemed old-fashioned, even strange. Doctors and psychologists began to study sleep scientifically, dissecting it into cycles and stages, searching for rules to control what had once been intuitive. The night was no longer a friend, it was a problem to solve, and yet the body never truly forgot. In quiet villages untouched by electricity, the two sleeps lingered like a memory. Farmers still rose in the middle of the night to check the hearth, to whisper a short prayer, or to look out over frost-covered fields. They didn't think of it as ancient or modern, it was simply natural. These final keepers of the rhythm lived as their ancestors had, unaware that the rest of the world had already left it behind. By the early 20th century, the second sleep had become a subject of curiosity. Anthropologists and historians stumbled across old references and wondered what they meant. How could people have slept twice? Why would they wake at midnight on purpose? The idea sounded foreign, even impossible. But with every document uncovered, every diary translated, the truth became clear. The two sleeps were not a myth, but a memory, a quiet fact buried beneath centuries of light. Spiritually, the loss of the second sleep represented more than a change in rest. It marked a change in how people related to the night itself. Where earlier generations saw darkness as a time for reflection and faith, modern life saw it as emptiness to be filled with activity. Silence, once sacred, became discomfort. The stars above, once a map for thought and prayer, became invisible behind haze and smoke. Humanity had conquered night, but perhaps at the cost of something irreplaceable. Even now, when people wake in the early hours, the ancient rhythm stirs within them. They turn restless, unaware that their bodies are recalling the natural pattern of first sleep and second sleep. It is the whisper of an older world, a world where the night breathed slowly, where the heart matched the pace of the moon, and where waking in darkness was not a failure, but a quiet conversation with peace itself. The second sleep may have vanished from memory, but it still lives in the pulse of the human body, waiting for the world to slow down enough to remember. The story of the two sleeps is not only about the past, it is also a quiet mirror for the present. In our age of constant light and restless thought, it offers a lesson written softly in history, that rest is not a task to be completed, but a rhythm to be lived. The people of the Middle Ages did not need science to tell them when to sleep or how long. They listened to their bodies and trusted the silence of the night. Their pattern was not perfection, but harmony. The world moved more slowly then, and so did the heart. Perhaps what they understood, without ever saying it, is that peace does not come from more time, but from gentler time. In rediscovering their rhythm, we see how naturally the human body was designed for stillness. Left to its own darkness, it drifts into two phases of rest, divided by a brief and peaceful wakefulness. Modern science confirms what ancient life already knew, that waking in the middle of the night is not a failure of sleep, but part of its design. Our ancestors didn't fight it, they welcomed it. They stirred the fire, offered prayers, or simply watched the stars. They allowed the night to hold them instead of trying to master it. That simple acceptance is a wisdom we've almost forgotten. For the modern soul, this story feels both foreign and familiar. Many of us live under constant brightness screens, lamps, the quiet buzz of machines. We have tamed the dark so completely that we no longer remember how to rest within it. Yet when we wake unexpectedly at night, some small part of us remembers. That ancient rhythm stirs, reminding us that not every interruption is a problem. Sometimes the body simply asks for stillness, not sleep. The difference between the two is what defines true rest. The people of the Middle Ages might not have used the word mindfulness, but they practiced it naturally. Their nights were full of small pauses, moments when work stopped, sound faded, and thought became clear. Between first and second sleep, they were not chasing time or trying to escape it. They were living inside it, quietly aware. Modern life, filled with deadlines and notifications, leaves little room for that kind of peace. Yet it is still there, waiting for us in the spaces between noise, if we choose to listen. This old rhythm teaches us something profound about our relationship with the world around us. The earth moves slowly, the seasons turn gently, and for thousands of years, humans matched that pace. The first sleep mirrored the setting of the sun, the second, the approach of dawn. Each part of the night carried purpose, one for recovery, one for reflection. In returning to a single, continuous sleep, we may have gained convenience but lost connection. The wisdom of those long nights was not mystical. It was practical and deeply human. There's comfort in knowing that rest once included waking. The thought itself is freeing. It means that those quiet hours when we open our eyes in the dark are not wasted moments, but invitations. They remind us to breathe, to reflect, to be still. The night, even now, belongs not to noise or light, but to slowness. The people of the Middle Ages, without meaning to, left us a map back to calmer rhythm written in the pattern of their sleep, hidden but waiting to be rediscovered. For those who seek peace in the modern world, this rhythm offers a kind of reassurance. You do not have to fight the night to rest. You do not need to force the body into submission or measure your dreams in hours. Rest can come in many shapes, just as it once did. Perhaps the lesson is not to copy the past, but to remember that it existed, that there was once a time when silence was enough, when stillness itself was a form of prayer. The two sleeps also remind us that reflection and rest are intertwined. When we pause to think, to pray, or to watch the quiet sky, we rest the heart even if the eyes remain open. In the old world, the middle of the night was not a void, it was a living space, sacred in its stillness. To recover even a fraction of that in our age of constant motion would be to reclaim a forgotten peace. It does not require darkness or candles, it requires only time given without urgency. Some sleep researchers today experiment with reintroducing segmented sleep, letting volunteers follow the natural cycle of 2 rests. What they find is consistent. People wake feeling calmer, not more tired. Their minds drift naturally into reflection during the midnight hour. It seems the body still knows what the modern world has tried to forget. There's a quiet irony in this, that progress brought us endless light, yet peace remains hidden in darkness. For those who listen carefully, the night still whispers the same truth our ancestors once lived by, that rest cannot be rushed, and that waking in darkness is not a mistake. It is an invitation to breathe, to think, to feel the quiet of creation. Whether you pray, read, or simply lie awake for a moment, the silence itself restores you. The rhythm of the 2 sleeps may have vanished from our schedules, but it remains alive within the pulse of every human heart. In the quiet center of this history lies a simple truth. Peace has never depended on silence outside, but on stillness within. The people of the Middle Ages did not sleep better because their world was simpler, but because they accepted the rhythm of what could not be controlled. Darkness, noise, weatherall were part of the same fabric of life. When the night arrived, they let it have its way. Their calm was not comfort born from luxury, but patience born from trust. They believed that every night was a reminder of mercy, that after labor came rest, and after darkness came light, that faith, even without words, shaped the softness of their nights. We can learn from that patience. Today, many of us treat rest as an interruption, something to fit between tasks. We carry our thoughts into bed as though the mind could work forever. Yet history whispers that rest is an act of humility, to stop, to breathe, to let the body return to balance. The 2 sleeps were a living symbol of this truth. They gave space for reflection, space for prayer, and space to forget the noise of the world. Even now, the same gift waits each night, hidden in the hours we often overlook. There is also a deeper wisdom in the way they accepted imperfection. Waking in the night was not seen as failure. It was seen as part of the design. That small moment of consciousness between dreams was time to gather thoughts, to feel gratitude, to remember that life is not meant to be constant motion. In a time before constant electricity and screens, the night itself was a teacher, gentle, patient, unhurried. Perhaps the most powerful lesson of the 2 sleeps is this: peace begins when we stop fighting the natural rhythm of our own existence. Modern life rarely offers such stillness, but it can be rediscovered. It does not require the world to become dark again, only for us to slow our pace. The next time the night wakes you, you might not reach for a screen or count the hours until morning. You might simply listen to your heartbeat, to the silence, to the sound of time moving softly through the dark. The people of the past would have called that a blessing. The quiet hour when the world feels close and the spirit feels awake. There's also comfort in knowing that our ancestors, for all their hardships, experienced a kind of calm we can still touch. They did not seek escape from the world. They lived within it, accepting both its labor and its rest. They trusted the balance of day and night as something divinely ordered. That balance still exists, is only our pace that has changed. When we align with it, even briefly, we find that the same stillness still welcomes us. The stars may be dimmed by city light, but the peace they represented has not gone anywhere. Spiritually, the rhythm of two sleeps reminds us that rest is not separate from gratitude. In the darkness between sleeps, people once whispered thanks for warmth, for breath, for life itself. It was a quiet form of worship, unadorned and sincere. Even now, such gratitude softens the heart and prepares it for peace. We do not need to return to the 12th century to remember this. We only need to close our eyes, breathe slowly, and remember that rest itself is a mercy granted each night. The return to awareness during the night can be seen as a gentle reminder to reconnect with ourselves, with faith, or simply with calm. It is not a disruption, but an invitation. The people who lived by candlelight knew this instinctively. They filled the dark hours with prayer or thought, turning them into moments of renewal. When we see the night this way, not as lost time but as sacred pause, we begin to heal the restlessness that defines modern life. What history shows, then, is not that our ancestors were wiser, but that they were closer to nature's tempo. The slow rhythm of two sleeps was a reflection of their world's humility. Today, surrounded by light and noise, we must recreate that humility intentionally. The body still knows how. The mind only needs to remember. Even without darkness, we can honor the same balance through stillness, through gratitude, through the quiet acceptance that rest is not wasted time, but time returned. Some people who study sleep now speak of intentional waking, the act of embracing those early hours as peaceful rather than frustrating. It echoes the old practice without naming it. A few moments of prayer, reflection, or soft breathing at midnight can restore calm more deeply than forcing sleep ever could. In that small way, the wisdom of the past lives on, not as imitation, but as understanding. History, even at its quietest, continues to guide us back to ourselves. As the story of the two sleeps draws to its end, we see that it was never truly about sleep at all. It was about trust in rhythm, in silence, and in the unseen order of the night. It teaches that peace cannot be chased or purchased. It can only be allowed. The people of the Middle Ages lived this truth without knowing they were teaching it. And now, as we search for calm in our bright and busy world, their forgotten rhythm offers us one final reminder that stillness is not something we must create, is something that has always been waiting for us, quietly, in the dark. The story of the two sleeps has carried us through centuries of darkness and dawn. We have followed candles flickering in stone cottages, heard monks whisper prayers beneath cold arches, and watched cities trade stars for lamps. And now, as the world outside your window grows quiet again, we arrive at the final part of our journey, returning gently to the rhythm of rest. This chapter is not about the past alone. It is a slow exhale for the present, a way to remember that night was always meant to be kind, not hurried. Tonight, we travel not through time, but inward, toward the same peace our ancestors once knew in the silence between their two sleeps. Imagine, for a moment, the world without sound, the streets empty, the hum of machines gone. There is only the faint sigh of wind, the rhythm of your breathing, and the still pulse of the earth turning beneath you. This is the world they knew, the world of true night. The people of the Middle Ages did not fill this silence with distraction. They accepted it as it was, a natural space for reflection. The absence of noise became a language of calm. To return to the rhythm of rest is to learn that language again, to remember how to listen to quiet. In that older world, darkness was not something to fear. It was familiar, like a blanket drawn over the sky. It brought balance after the glare of day. People walked more slowly, spoke more softly, and allowed the night to shape their pace. In this, they were not being wise or deliberate, they were simply being human. The two sleeps fit that world perfectly because they belonged to a time that moved in harmony with nature. But even here, in the bright modern world, we can still borrow that rhythm. We only need to let the night be what it has always been, a time to stop striving. Think of your own evenings, the moments before sleep when the world begins to fade. Perhaps there's a quiet hum in your home, or the sound of distant rain. Maybe you notice how light falls differently after midnight, softer and slower. These are the moments when you step close to that ancient rhythm. The first sleep comes as your body unwinds. The second comes later, not in schedule but in spirit, deeper, quieter kind of rest. You may not wake in between, yet your heart follows the same pattern: tension, release, reflection, renewal. The rhythm never truly left us. It only changed shape. The truth is, rest has always been more than sleep. It is the way the soul finds balance in a world that moves too quickly. The people of the Middle Ages didn't separate labor from stillness. They belonged to one another. The same hands that worked the fields also folded in prayer. The same eyes that watched the sunrise also looked calmly into darkness. Their nights were longer, yes, but not emptier. They carried meaning because they allowed time for thought. That same meaning is still waiting for us each night when we put aside the noise of the world and breathe slowly. When you close your eyes tonight, you are not so different from them. The same moon that hung above their rooftops shines above yours. The same silence that filled their rooms can fill yours too, if you let it. The rhythm of the two sleeps was never just about when people rested, it was about how they trusted the stillness between. You do not need to wake at midnight to rediscover it. You only need to allow yourself to slow, to remember that peace was always part of the night's design. There is comfort in knowing that this ancient rhythm still lives inside us. It beats softly beneath our modern lives, steady and patient. Each time we let go of urgency, each time we breathe and listen, we step closer to it, resting deeply, thinking gently, waking calmly. These are not luxuries, but inheritances. The people who lived before electricity did not have our distractions, yet they carried a kind of wisdom we can still touch. The wisdom of trusting time instead of chasing it. As you rest, think of how the old nights might have sounded. The soft whisper of straw beneath blankets, the pop of a log in the fire, the faint rustle of wind at the shutters. Each sound was a note in the lullaby of life. They did not listen for silence. They listened within it. In that listening, they found peace. The stillness between sleeps was not an emptiness, it was a conversation with the calmness of creation. When you listen tonight, the same peace waits for you, patient and unchanged. Every generation loses something and gains something new. We may have lost the deep dark and the natural wakefulness of our ancestors, but we've gained awareness of how precious stillness can be. We can choose to make space for it, against to dim the lights, slow the mind, and trust that waking briefly at night is not failure, but continuity. In that brief wakefulness, if it comes, you are part of a lineage as old as time itself, one that knew the night, not as a void, but as a gentle companion. The return to rest is not about imitation. It is not about sleeping as they did, but remembering why they slept as they did. They allowed the night to hold them, to remind them that the world continues without their effort. In that surrender was peace, and that peace is still possible for us. The two sleeps were simply a reflection of faith in time, in silence, in balance. We do not need to call it by the same name to feel its truth. All we need is to breathe deeply, to trust the rhythm that carried them through centuries of darkness, and to let it carry us, too, into calm. As the night deepens, the rhythm of rest returns once more. The world outside falls silent, just as it did for the villagers and wanderers of long ago. The air cools, the heartbeat slows, and thought begins to fade. In this shared quiet, the same one that has wrapped humanity for centuries, you can feel how small and sacred the night truly is. We often imagine we are far from the past, yet every breath we take beneath the moon is the same one our ancestors once drew. We rest, as they did, beneath the same sky, cradled by the same turning earth. When we look back, the story of two sleeps becomes more than history, it becomes a mirror. It shows how the human spirit once trusted the dark instead of fighting it, how peace was something earned, not through control, but through surrender. The night, they understood, did not need fixing, it only needed patience. To wake in the middle of it was not to interrupt rest, but to step into its heart. And as we learn that again, we begin to remember that quiet itself is one of life's oldest mercies. Imagine now the end of a long medieval night. The fire's glow fades to embers, and the faint light of dawn touches the horizon. The people stir from their second sleep, calm, renewed, ready to face the day. There are no alarms, no rush, only the slow return of sound, a cough, a rooster, the crackle of wood. The rhythm of the two sleeps is complete. In that moment, everything feels balanced, as though the world has exhaled. And perhaps, without knowing it, that is the very peace we still search for today. There is beauty in that idea that what was once natural can still be felt, even in our modern lives. We do not need to abandon the present to reclaim that calm. We only need to pause, to step back from the glow of our own lights and listen to the older rhythm that still hums beneath them. It is not gone, only quiet, waiting for those who remember how to hear it. The body remembers, even when the world forgets. Tonight, as you rest, think of how easily the people of the past drifted into sleep. Not because their lives were easier, but because their nights were slower. They trusted the dark to hold them. They trusted time to move without their effort. That same trust is still within reach. The heart does not need centuries to return to stillness, it only needs one gentle moment, one quiet breath. And with that, you too can follow the ancient rhythm into peace. The story of the two sleeps reminds us that rest is not the absence of life, it is part of it. In the hush of the night, everything that truly matters grows clear. Gratitude, patience, humility. To rest well is to honor those things. When we lie down each night, we repeat a ritual older than memory, a rhythm written into the human soul by the one who made both day and night. The people of the Middle Ages did not invent calm. They simply lived close enough to feel it. And so, as the story fades, let yourself rest. Let your mind drift like smoke from an old hearth. The world will wait. The day will come. But for now, the night belongs to you. It always has. The rhythm of first sleep and second sleep is not something to recover, it is something to remember. Every quiet breath, every gentle heartbeat is part of that same ancient pattern of renewal. You are, in this very moment, continuing a story that began long before you. If your eyes are still open, let them soften. If your thoughts are still loud, let them slow. You have walked far tonight through centuries of history, through candlelight and silence, through the long-forgotten ways of rest. You are back now, in your own time, but the calm remains. The world outside may be bright, but within you, the dark is kind, familiar, and still. Thank you for joining this quiet journey through time and sleep. If you've enjoyed this gentle walk through history, I invite you to subscribe, like, and ring the bell so you can return for the next story. There is always another forgotten chapter waiting, another calm path through the past where peace still lives between every word. Next time, we'll explore a new question from another corner of the ancient world. What did Romans do all day when they weren't at war? Until then, rest well, breathe deeply, and may your night be filled with the same stillness that once guided the world to sleep.